Fea's body trembled as the cold sliced through her veins. The icy remnants of the forgotten research station surrounded her, its once bustling halls now silent and lifeless. The walls, cold and unforgiving, seemed to echo the final breaths of a dying world. Outside, the endless snow stretched for miles, covering the landscape in an unbroken sea of white, while inside, the station's lights flickered, struggling against the creeping frost. It had been months since she had last seen another soul, months since the cold had first settled in, thick and suffocating. Her species, once proud and numerous, had been pushed to the edge of extinction, scattered to the far corners of the galaxy by enemies that sought to erase them from existence. Now here she was, alone in this forsaken station, a shadow of the alien warrior she had once been. Her bones ached with the deep, gnawing chill that consumed her, each breath growing shallower, more labored. Fea's vision blurred as her strength faded, her limbs no longer responding to her desperate will to survive. The cold wasn't just outside, it was inside her too, sinking deep into her flesh. Her body was no longer hers, it was just another casualty of this merciless planet. But she didn't have the strength to fight it. She had reached the end of her strength and the darkness seemed eager to take her. Just as her mind began to slip, her eyes caught a faint light in the distance. It wasn't much, a mere glimmer in the sea of white, but it was enough to pull her from the grip of despair. She blinked, confused at first, unsure whether her mind was playing tricks on her. But no, it was real. A door, the faintest outline of a door almost invisible against the background of snow and metal, but undeniably there. With what little strength remained, Fea stumbled toward it. Each step felt like a lifetime, her body weighed down by the chill, but she pushed forward, driven by an instinct she hadn't realized she still had. Her heart, though sluggish, began to race. Could it be salvation? Could it be someone, anyone, who could help? She didn't know, but she couldn't afford to care anymore. She needed to believe. The door loomed before her, seemingly mocking her with its promise of warmth, of hope, yet still so far away. With shaking hands, she reached out and knocked. The sound was weak, almost imperceptible, a last desperate plea for help. Her vision blurred again as her knees buckled beneath her, and the cold rushed in to claim her once more. Her mind teetered on the edge, slipping into unconsciousness. But the last thing she felt before the darkness took her was the faintest glimmer of hope. And then, everything went black. Inside the research station, Commander Lucas Novak sat alone, hunched over, a set of broken control panels. The station's systems were failing, nothing new. He had long since stopped expecting miracles or even good news. His mission was simple: survive. After the war had scattered humanity's forces, he found himself stranded on this forgotten outpost with no one to report to and nothing to do but keep the lights on and the temperature up. Every day felt like the same dull grind, empty, isolated and cold. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, reminding him how small and fragile he was in this vast, uncaring universe. But it wasn't the cold that made him numb. It was the silence. The overwhelming, deafening silence that came with being alone in a place like this. It had been weeks since he last heard from anyone, and even longer since he had seen another human. He had long since given up on finding hope. The war had seen to that. But then there was a sound. A knock. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, like a whisper through the howling wind. Lucas froze, his heart skipping a beat. No one ever came here. The station was forgotten, abandoned. Who could possibly be out there? He hesitated, his mind racing with possibilities. Was it a trap? An enemy, pretending to be in distress to lure him out? Or maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him, longing for contact in a place where only ghosts lingered. But then the knock came again, louder this time. Desperate. Lucas moved quickly, his instincts kicking in. He grabbed his rifle, checking the safety, then slowly approached the door. His pulse quickened as he drew closer, each step heavier than the last. Whoever was out there was in trouble. There was no mistaking that. When he finally reached the door, he hesitated. He didn't know what he would find on the other side, but something in him knew he couldn't turn away. Not again. Not like this. He opened the door, and the sight that greeted him nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. There, crumpled in the snow, was an alien, fragile, shivering, her skin pale blue, her body barely more than skin and bone. Her white hair was matted with ice, and her lips were blue, her breath coming in weak, labored gasps. She was an alien, one of the lost species, but there was no mistaking the desperation in her eyes. Without thinking, Lucas dropped his rifle, rushing to her side. He lifted her gently, cradling her in his arms. She was light, too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. He could feel the cold radiating from her body stiff with frost. "Hey," he whispered, trying to keep his voice calm. "You're okay now. I've got you." Her eyes flickered open, barely meeting his, but she didn't fight him. She didn't recoil. There was no fight left in her, just a quiet surrender. For a moment, Lucas hesitated, unsure what to do. But then he made the decision. He would get her inside. He would save her, whatever it took. He carried her inside, away from the cold, away from the endless snow, into the warmth of the station. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas felt something stir within him, something long buried. Hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. As he laid her down on a bed of discarded blankets, Lucas could only watch as the alien woman, Vea, slipped into unconsciousness. She was alive for now. But what came next? Would he be able to save her? Or was this just another lost cause? He didn't know. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something. Something that had the power to change everything. The door had been opened, and now he had to keep it that way. Lucas stared at the alien woman lying on the makeshift bed, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, the cold still clinging to her skin. She was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Pale blue skin, silver white hair, and faintly glowing veins that seemed to pulse beneath the surface. His mind raced with questions, but there was no time for answers yet. He had to focus on keeping her alive. He ran his hands over her body, checking for injuries. Her clothing, if it could be called that, was threadbare and shredded from exposure. The fabric barely offered any protection against the harsh environment she'd been left to die in. She was thin, painfully so, her bones jutting out in places where muscle had long since been wasted. Her face, though, was the most haunting. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal, but the exhaustion in her eyes spoke of a life lived in constant survival. Lucas shook his head, cursing under his breath. What the hell was she doing out there? No one should be alive after spending that long in the cold alone. And yet, there she was, barely clinging to life. He quickly rummaged through the station's sparse supplies, grabbing a thermal blanket, water, and some ration bars that had been sitting in storage for God knew how long. As he returned to her side, he noticed the faint fluttering of her eyelids. She was awake, just barely. "Hey," he whispered, placing a hand gently on her cold arm. Her skin felt like ice. "You're safe now. I'm going to help you." Her eyelids flickered, her gaze sharp but weak, locking onto his face. There was a brief moment of recognition, an alien knowing she wasn't alone anymore. But her lips didn't move, not at first. She just blinked, as if deciding whether or not to trust him. Lucas swallowed hard, hoping his own voice could convey the comfort he wanted to offer. "I'm Lucas. You're all right. Just hang on." With shaky hands, he peeled back the layers of her soaked, frozen clothing, careful not to hurt her further. Her skin shone faintly in the low light, an almost translucent glow. As he covered her in the warm thermal blanket, he noticed her breathing become slightly more even, though still ragged. He watched for a moment, noting the strange but undeniably beautiful curves of her body, different from human anatomy in ways he couldn't quite place. Her species was alien, sure, but there was something familiar about her form, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. His mind, always analytical in the face of crisis, began to wonder about her biology. Was her metabolism different? Could she withstand the cold more than humans? And why was she alone, so far from anyone else? Questions flooded his mind, but it was too soon to ask. The first priority was to get her stable. He tore open a ration pack and offered her a bite of the protein paste inside. She hesitated at first, her eyes flicking to the food and then back to him. She wasn't used to being taken care of. It was clear in the way she looked at him, cautious, wary, like someone who had been betrayed too many times to trust easily. "Eat," he said softly, his voice coaxing. "It'll help." Her lips parted slightly and she took a hesitant bite, her movements slow and uncertain. Lucas watched her closely, worried that if he pushed too much she'd reject the offer, but to his relief she swallowed. Her eyes closed for a moment, as if savoring the warmth and nourishment that her body so desperately needed. After a few minutes she looked at him again, her expression softer now, but still filled with an air of distrust. She wasn't ready to speak, but the way she looked at him was enough. She understood that he wasn't an enemy. She wasn't quite ready to give him her trust, but she was alive, and that was a start. Lucas sat back in the chair beside her, not wanting to crowd her but unable to tear his eyes away. There was something about her that called to him, something that was both fascinating and terrifying. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a living mystery. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized she wasn't the only one who had questions. He needed to know her story. He needed to know who she was, where she came from, and why she was here, all alone in this forsaken place. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time in a long time, Lucas felt like there was something important happening, something that went beyond his usual day-to-day survival. This alien woman, this creature from another world, had knocked on his door for help, and he had opened it. In that single, decisive act, his life had changed, and he knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. He wasn't just keeping her alive for the sake of survival. No, this was something more. This was a turning point. They both had a chance to move past the ghosts of their respective worlds and create something new, something that had never existed before. A connection, built on trust and necessity, but maybe, just maybe, something deeper. Vea's eyes drifted shut again, and her body seemed to relax, the warmth of the thermal blanket finally beginning to seep into her frozen muscles. Lucas sat there watching over her, unsure of what the future held, but certain of one thing: this was far from over. The universe had brought her to him for a reason. She wasn't just some casualty of war. She was a survivor. And she needed him just as much as he needed her. With a soft sigh, Lucas leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her form. The cold outside howled, but in here, in this small corner of the forgotten station, there was warmth, both literal and figurative, and he was determined to protect it, for as long as it lasted. As the days passed, Lucas found himself caught in the strange rhythm of caring for Vea. The initial urgency had faded, replaced by a slow but steady routine. The warmth of the station was now her sanctuary, and each small step toward recovery felt like a personal victory. But the questions were still there, gnawing at him, lurking beneath the surface of every action, every quiet moment. Who was she? Why was she alone? And how had she survived the brutal cold of the planet for so long? Vea's condition steadily improved. Her skin, once as cold as the surrounding ice, now retained some warmth, though she still had the occasional tremor that ran through her like a reminder of the deep cold she'd endured. Her eyes were more focused, the exhaustion slowly lifting from them, and every now and then, Lucas would catch her looking at him, studying him with an intensity that made him feel oddly self-conscious. She was trying to understand him as much as he was trying to understand her. For the most part, they didn't speak much. Lucas wasn't sure if it was because of the language barrier, or simply because Vea wasn't yet ready to talk. The silence between them was never awkward, though. It was a companionable quiet, filled with the unspoken understanding of two people in a place where words weren't always necessary. Still, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Vea than met the eye. He had heard stories about alien species, some of them terrifying, others less so, but none of them quite like her. On the fourth day, Vea seemed to regain some of her strength. She sat up slowly, her muscles stiff from disuse, and Lucas was there beside her just in case. He noticed that she didn't flinch when he moved near her. No sharp intake of breath, no instinctive withdrawal. Her eyes locked onto his, a silent acknowledgement that she trusted him, at least enough to let him help. "How do you feel?" Lucas asked gently, his voice quiet but warm. Vea blinked, her gaze shifting downward, as if weighing the question. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Still, it was the first time she had tried to communicate since arriving. "I am alive," she said slowly, each word deliberate, as if testing the limits of her own speech. The words were jagged and broken, but they were words. Lucas leaned in, hearing the effort it took for her to form them. "That's good," he said with a smile, trying to offer reassurance. "You're getting stronger every day." She didn't respond immediately, but her eyes flickered toward the small window in the corner of the room. Outside, the wind howled, as it always did on this forsaken world. But inside, the warmth from the makeshift furnace was steady, holding the cold at bay. Vea seemed to be contemplating something, her eyes distant, as though her mind were somewhere, far away. Lucas sat beside her, letting the silence stretch, not wanting to force her to talk if she wasn't ready. He noticed how her fingers twitched slightly, as though she were trying to touch something just out of reach. Her gaze softened, her lips barely parting as if about to speak again. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice fragile but clear. The question was unexpected, but it was a question Lucas had been waiting for. "You're in my shelter," he answered simply. "This is where I've been living. It's not much, but it's safe. For now." Vea didn't respond right away, but Lucas could tell she was processing his words. The way her brow furrowed and her eyes narrowed indicated that she was thinking, perhaps trying to make sense of this new place, this new life she had found herself in. Her species had been scattered across the galaxy, she had told him, in bits and pieces, but she had never said why. Why was she alone? What had happened to the others of her kind? "Why did you help me?" Vea's question broke through the silence, direct and unexpected. Her eyes fixed on him with a clarity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see right through him. "Why didn't you leave me to die out there?" Lucas was taken aback by the question. He had expected her to ask about the food, the shelter, or even where she was, but not this. He took a moment before answering, unsure of what to say. "I didn't think about it," he said honestly. "You were in trouble. I couldn't just leave you there. It's as simple as that. I've been alone for so long. Maybe I just needed someone else to care for." The words hung between them for a moment, vulnerable and raw. Vea's gaze softened, and for the first time since meeting her, Lucas saw something like understanding in her eyes. She didn't need him to explain more. She could tell there was truth in his words. Slowly, Vea nodded, her eyes dropping to her lap as if she were contemplating his answer. She seemed to be considering the offer of safety, but there was something more beneath her calm exterior, a quiet storm of emotions that Lucas couldn't quite read. He shifted in his seat, trying to make her more comfortable. "You can stay here for as long as you need," he added. "I know it's not much, but it's better than being out there alone." For the first time, Vea smiled, faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It warmed something inside Lucas that he hadn't realized had gone cold. She hadn't trusted him fully yet, but this small sign of recognition made him feel like he was doing something right. As the days passed, their relationship evolved in ways Lucas hadn't expected. They shared meals, simple ones, but it became a routine, a shared experience. She began to talk more, her voice growing stronger with each attempt. It was like learning to walk again, every word deliberate, but each one a step closer to understanding. Vea began to reveal fragments of her past, bits of her story between moments of quiet. She spoke of her people, of their exile, their flight from enemies who had wiped out entire colonies. She spoke in riddles at first, but slowly, Lucas pieced together a picture of her race, a people who had been scattered across the galaxy, their future uncertain. "I was part of a fleet," Vea said one evening, her voice quiet as she stared into the fire. "We were ambushed. I was the only one who made it out. Alone." Lucas listened intently, his heart aching with the realization of what she had endured. It wasn't just the cold of the planet she had survived. It was the cold of her past, the betrayal, the loss, the isolation. Everything she had fought for had been taken from her. "I'm sorry," Lucas said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't imagine what that must have been like." Vea didn't respond, at first, but after a moment she met his gaze. "No one can. But I've learned to survive. Alone." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Until now." Lucas was silent, unsure how to respond. He had no idea what it meant to lose everything, to be stranded on a planet with no hope of ever seeing another soul. His world had been torn apart by war, but this was different. Vea had lost her people, her family, her entire existence. And yet, here she was, alive. Here they were, together in this small, unlikely corner of the universe. The room was silent, except for the crackling of the fire, but Lucas felt the weight of her words. They were two survivors, two beings from different worlds brought together by chance or fate. But whatever it was, Lucas knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. The days blended together in a quiet, unexpected harmony. Lucas had never imagined that the isolated life he had carved out for himself would change this drastically. He had been content in his solitude, finding peace in the silence and the simplicity of just surviving. But with Vea's presence, everything had shifted. She was no longer just a wounded alien woman he had rescued. She had become an anchor in the desolate, barren landscape of his existence, and as the days went by, Lucas found himself more drawn to her, not just out of necessity, but because of something he couldn't quite name. Vea, for her part, had begun to change as well. The cold, calculating woman who had first collapsed at his doorstep seemed to be slowly disappearing, replaced by someone softer, more vulnerable. Her walls, which had been built out of years of pain and survival, were beginning to crack. Just a little. One afternoon, Lucas was working on the station's broken heating unit, his hands greasy from the rusted coils and wires. The station's heating system had been unreliable for months, and now, in the dead of winter, it was starting to fail again. The chill was starting to creep back into the shelter, and he could feel it in his bones as he tried to fix the old, malfunctioning system. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he cursed under his breath, twisting a stubborn bolt that just wouldn't budge. He heard Vea's soft voice behind him, and he froze, mid-turn. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was usually in broken phrases, her words a puzzle to decipher. But she had been trying to communicate more lately, trying to bridge the gap between them. "Lucas," she said, her voice low but strong. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag before turning around to face her. She was standing in the doorway of the small room, watching him with those ever-observant eyes. There was something different about the way she was looking at him, an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "You're working too hard," she said, her tone soft, but firm, as if she had been thinking about this for some time. "You don't have to do it all alone." Lucas smiled, though it felt more like a reflex than anything else. "I'm used to it," he replied, his voice gruff, "and it needs to be done. Can't let the place fall apart, can I?" She tilted, her head slightly as though considering his words. Her blue skin glistened in the dim light of the station, and her white hair seemed almost to glow in the low light. Despite her fragile appearance, there was strength in the way she carried herself, a silent resilience that reminded him of the strength he had once seen in soldiers who had been through hell and back. "You don't have to carry the weight alone anymore, Lucas," she said quietly, taking a step closer. "We're in this together." Her words hung in the air, charged with meaning. The room seemed to grow quieter, the tension between them thick. Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. She had never said anything like that before. He had always viewed their relationship as something born out of circumstance. She was a survivor, and he was just the one who had found her. But what Vea had just said made him realize something he had never allowed himself to think. They were more than that. They were partners in this. Lucas took a deep breath and moved toward her, his heart racing in a way that was completely unfamiliar. "Together," he echoed, his voice low, almost hesitant. The word tasted strange on his tongue, as though it was something he hadn't allowed himself to believe for a long time. Vea nodded, the smallest of smiles curving her lips. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived here, and neither was he. The cold, indifferent man who had just wanted to survive was becoming something else, something more open, more human. And it was Vea who was helping him realize it. "I never thought I would say this," Lucas began, running a hand through his hair, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I think I'm starting to believe you." Vea stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached out a hand, and for the first time Lucas didn't hesitate to take it. Her skin was cool against his, but there was something in the touch, something that made the warmth in the room feel real, feel like it mattered. It wasn't just the furnace keeping them alive. It was something else entirely. "I know it's hard to trust," Vea said, her voice almost a whisper. "But sometimes you have to let someone else help." Lucas looked down at their entwined hands, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. "I've been on my own for so long. I didn't know how to ask for help." "You don't have to ask," she replied, her voice steady now, as though she had finally found her own place in this strange world they were creating. "Not anymore." There was a quiet pause between them, one that stretched far longer than either of them expected. Lucas felt a stirring inside, something deeper than the physical attraction that had been building between them since the moment he had carried her inside. It was a connection, a bond forged in the fires of survival, and yet something more. He hadn't realized it until now, but he cared for her in a way that was impossible to deny. I think I'd like that," he said softly, his voice almost cracking with the weight of his own emotions. Vea's eyes softened as she nodded. She reached up then, her fingers brushing against his cheek in a gesture so gentle that it caught him off guard. It was a touch full of understanding, of acceptance, of something neither of them had known they needed until this very moment. "Then we'll figure it out," she said quietly, her voice carrying a promise. "Together." The next few weeks passed in a haze of small, shared moments. They worked side by side, tackling the various tasks that had piled up during the long months of isolation. Vea had proven to be resourceful, picking up the skills she needed to help with repairs, cooking, and even helping Lucas navigate the more technical systems of the station. The more they worked together, the more natural their partnership became. But as the station warmed, so did the atmosphere between them. The shared silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with unspoken words, with glances that spoke volumes. Their connection grew with every passing day, like a thread weaving them closer together, binding their fates in a way that neither of them could have anticipated. One night, as they sat by the fire, sharing the last of the rations they had, Lucas found himself watching Vea more closely than he ever had before. The firelight cast dancing shadows across her features, softening the sharpness of her alien features, making her seem almost human in a way that made his heart beat faster. "You know," Lucas said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never imagined this is how my life would turn out." Vea's gaze met his, a small knowing smile on her lips. "None of us ever do," she replied softly. "But maybe that's how it's meant to be. We find our way, one step at a time." Lucas nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so long wondering what his life meant after the war, after everything had fallen apart. But now, sitting here with Vea, he realized that maybe it wasn't about the grand plan. It was about the steps they were taking together, about the bond they were building no matter how unlikely it seemed. In that moment, Lucas knew that no matter what the future held, it would be different, it would be better, and it would be theirs, together. For the first time in a long while, Lucas allowed himself to believe in something more than just survival. He believed in the possibility of hope, of love, and the chance to build something that was truly worth living for. The days had grown longer as Lucas and Vea's routine solidified into something more than mere survival. The temperature outside had started to dip even further, but inside their small shelter there was warmth, both from the furnace and from the bond they had built. There was an unspoken rhythm between them, a flow to their days that had once seemed impossible. What had started as an accidental pairing, born out of necessity and circumstance, was now something deeper. They had become a team, partners in every sense of the word. As the days passed, the warmth in their relationship began to extend beyond the work they did together. Vea, once the solitary, guarded alien who had barely managed to trust Lucas enough to let him help her, had begun to reveal more of herself. Her walls, carefully constructed over years of isolation and loss, were slowly but surely falling. She laughed more now, a soft melodic sound that Lucas had learned to listen for. Her smile, once faint and hesitant, now came more freely. And though she still struggled to share her past, Lucas noticed the way her eyes softened when she spoke of her people, of what they had lost, and of the future she dared to imagine. In return, Lucas found himself doing something he never thought he would. He opened up. He had spent so many years burying the memories of war, of loss, of being alone, that he had forgotten what it was like to let someone in. But with Vea, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble, piece by piece. There were no more secrets between them, just two people from two different worlds struggling to rebuild something that mattered. One evening, after a long day of repairs and gathering what little supplies they could salvage from the station, they sat by the fire together, the low hum of the heating unit filling the silence around them. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the room, and for once there was no need for words. Vea sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her silver-white hair a soft contrast against the dark fabric of his jacket. "I never thought I'd be here," Lucas said, quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't looking at her, but staring into the fire, watching the flames dance. "Not like this, not with you." Vea looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the fire. She studied his face for a moment before replying, her voice gentle. "You thought you were the only one left," she said, her words soft but laced with understanding. "I know. I felt that way too. But now, we're not alone anymore." Lucas turned his head, meeting her gaze, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the silence held all the answers they needed. What they had found here, together, was more than just a survival partnership. It was a chance to heal, to rebuild, to learn what it meant to care for someone else in a way that went beyond the physical, in a way that mattered. "Yeah," Lucas said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I guess you're right. We're not alone anymore." The fire crackled again, its warmth enveloping them, and for the first time in a long while, Lucas felt something that had eluded him for years: peace. There was no more running, no more fighting. They had found each other in the most unexpected way, and now they were together, a small but powerful force in a galaxy that had once seemed so vast, so uncaring. The next few days brought more challenges, of course. The heating system still wasn't functioning properly, and the supplies they had been rationing were beginning to dwindle. But something had shifted. Vea and Lucas no longer saw these obstacles as insurmountable. They faced each problem with a calm, steady determination, as if their connection had given them a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. Then one morning, as Lucas was checking the exterior of the station for any signs of damage, he noticed something unexpected. Movement on the horizon. A small figure, moving slowly but surely, was trekking through the snow. It was too far away to make out any details, but Lucas could tell one thing. It wasn't just the wind playing tricks on his eyes. Someone was out there. His heart began to race as he turned back toward the shelter. Vea was still inside, resting after a long night of repairs. He rushed to the door and called for her, his voice filled with urgency. "Vea, get up, someone's out there." She jumped to her feet immediately, her face a mask of concern. "Who is it?" "I don't know," Lucas replied, "but we can't take any chances. We need to be ready." Vea nodded without a word, and together they prepared themselves for whatever was to come. They hadn't seen another soul in months, and the idea that someone else might have survived the harsh conditions of the planet was both thrilling and terrifying. As they stepped outside, the wind biting at their faces, the figure in the distance grew clearer. It was a person, barely standing, their clothes tattered and covered in snow. Lucas's heart sank. Whoever it was, they didn't look well. Vea took a deep breath beside him, her voice steady despite the unease in her eyes. "We can help them, Lucas, we have to." Without hesitation, they began walking toward the stranger. As they got closer, they could see that the person was a young woman, human by the looks of it. But she was barely conscious, her legs trembling with each step. Her face was gaunt and her lips were cracked, as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days. The woman collapsed just as they reached her, and Lucas rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Vea knelt beside them, her eyes scanning the woman's condition quickly, her alien training kicking in. "We need to get her inside," Vea said. "She's freezing. If we don't act fast, she'll die out here." Lucas nodded, already lifting the woman into his arms. With Vea's help, they carried her back to the shelter, where Lucas laid her down on the bed they had made for themselves. He quickly covered her with blankets, checking for signs of frostbite and trying to warm her as best as he could. As Vea tended to the stranger, Lucas stepped back for a moment, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had led him here. He had never imagined that his life, once filled with nothing but survival and isolation, would now be filled with so much more. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about living, about caring, about finding the people who needed help and offering it without hesitation. And then, as Vea turned to him, her face serious but her eyes soft, Lucas realized something. They weren't just saving lives anymore. They were building a future, together. Not just for themselves, but for anyone who might need a place to call home. Weeks passed, and the shelter began to feel more like a home. The young woman they had rescued, named Selene, had recovered under their care. And as the days went on, more and more survivors found their way to the small, safe haven Lucas and Vea had created. Each person they helped added to the growing sense of community, and with each new arrival, they all became something stronger than just survivors. They became a family. Lucas, standing at the door of the shelter one evening, looked out at the snow-covered horizon, his arm wrapped around Vea's waist. The future, uncertain and unknown, was no longer something to fear. Together they had found a new path, a path of hope, of connection, and of love. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas didn't feel alone. Not anymore.